Hi, this is Penny from the Cascade branch of Kent District Library. It's Tuesday night at 6:30, so it's time again to talk about what we're reading. Tonight, I have with me Mark Dunham from the Rockford branch. Mark always knows the best book to read. He's been talking about them live on Instagram the last few months. He's a star on Monday nights on Instagram telling us about the books he's reading. Tonight, Mark says he has a new favorite book. And that's always very exciting. So, Mark Dunham, what are you reading?
Well, thanks a lot for having me, Penny. I really appreciate it. My favorite go-to recommendations for, people that come into the library are classic Michigan books, especially those overlooked classics, because they're people and places and events that we can all relate to. But today, I'm going to make a huge departure
Okay.
from my usual go-to place. Today, my favorite book, and I'm going to say it's my favorite book in the world because
Really?
it truly is. And this book, oh, can you see that?
Yeah, what's it called?
It's called Here's to You, Jesusa, and it's by a woman named Elena Poniatowska. Okay?
We might make you spell that later, Mark.
Okay. So, have you ever heard of this book?
I have never heard of that book.
Have you ever heard of this author?
No.
Well, I've made it my life's goal to change that.
Okay.
Okay. And there's a story about how I came by this book because, in our book discussion group here at Rockford, we have a long, we've been meeting for many, many years, our
Mhm.
book group here in Rockford. And it's a real interesting crowd. And we always say we read a variety of things, some old, some new, some fiction, nonfiction, whatever. Well, when we picked our books for 2019, a couple of the members seemed to be pretty upset, and I was like, well, what's going on? And they said, well, our books are just so provincial. And at first I was like, kind of like, whoa, kind of thinking, well, but then I thought, well, maybe, in 2020, why don't we have International Year? And that's what
Okay.
we've been reading. And so we picked books from all over the globe, and of course we wanted a book from our closest neighbor, Mexico. And so I was looking at some different titles, and I had like a list of 3 or 4 books, and of course I have people in my home from Mexico. And
Oh,
so I said,
yeah.
I said, who happens to be a literature professor, actually. and
Oh,
and
wow.
so yeah, and so I said, well, what about? And I got to this title, and he says, oh, they would really like that. And so we picked this book. Here's to You, Jesusa. Well, and so I read some descriptions. Basically, what the book is about, it's a true story. It's about a woman who was born. A true story. A woman, Jesusa, was born around the year 1900, and then the revolution broke out in 1910, the Mexican Revolution. Well, her father, of course, takes up with the revolution, and so Jesusa grows up with the revolution. Okay, and it turns out that many events that were important, in Mexican history in the 20th century, Jesusa was involved in. Okay, and but the author also has a really fascinating background because Elena Poniatowska, living in Mexico City,
Mhm.
well, her mother, she's Mexican on her mother's side, and
Right.
and she's Polish on her father's side. And through her father's family, she's a direct descendant of one of the last kings of Poland.
Real.
Um, Really, so Elena Poniatowska is literally a princess. She refused the title for various reasons, but she could have accepted the title and become Princess Elena. And so and Elena Poniatowska was born 1932, 1933 in Paris. And they were living in Paris because her mother's family had fled the revolution and they were living in France. And there was some connection, some French connection, because the French occupied Mexico in the 1860s, and there was some connection with that. But so she's French, Polish on her father's side, Mexican on her mother's side, born in France, 1932 or 1933. Well, her parents actually ended up, well, her father stayed and fought in World War II, but the family fled, France, from the Nazis,
Right.
and moved back to Mexico City, in the early 1940s.
No one can accuse you of being provincial this year.
Oh, well, thanks for saying that. But it gets better because, Elena Poniatowska, real, comes from a real elite background, of course. And this
Princess.
is a true story. And so she meets Jesusa. And she hears about Jesusa. And she's like, well, I just got to know this story. So, well, anyway. But so Elena.
So this is a biography. This isn't fiction, it's a biography?
It's a blend, well, Elena Poniatowska becomes a journalist quite by accident, and she becomes a writer, which is a real interesting story about how Elena Poniatowska becomes a writer. But anyway, so but yeah, Elena Poniatowska, she says, I got to meet this woman, and so she does, and she goes to see Jesusa. Jesusa is just, because like I said, Elena Poniatowska is literally princess, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Jesusa, she's old, she's dirty, she's mean, she's everything. She has a mouth like a sewer. She likes to drink, she likes to fight. She is just cantankerous as all get out. She doesn't want to have anything to do with this princess.
Okay.
But see, Elena Poniatowska is real persistent, and so she says, fine, but Jesusa says, I'm not giving my story away. You're going to have to work for it. Well, Jesusa's got chickens in her house, and she says, if I'm going to tell you anything, you have to take my chickens out for a walk. Which,
what?
oh yeah, she has to tie these strings to the chickens and take them out. It's a complete disaster. And so
Picking this up, right?
no, this is a true story. This woman, all really happened, and so Elena's real persistent, and and Jesusa, she'll be, I don't want to see you today. Oh, and of course Jesus is older, but she's real persistent, and she keeps going, and Jesusa will make her help her out with chores or do this or that, and or she says, I don't have time for you today. I'm so well, but hey, Elena's real persistent, and she keeps interviewing Jesusa. She goes there from her nice neighborhood in Mexico City and goes to Jesusa's not so prosperous neighborhood and interviews her for 10 years.
10 years?
Yeah.
Get out.
She goes there and talks to Jesusa, and Jesusa, and that's the brilliant thing about this book, is that the two of them over time develop really close, intimate, meaningful friendship. So, and that's the brilliance of this book, is that despite their vast social differences and vastly different circumstances, they have gifts, gifts of friendship that they give to each other. So just absolutely stunning book. broke my heart. My heart exploded, and just
No, but you didn't answer my question. Is it in the fiction section or is this a nonfiction?
we shove it in. We shove it in fiction,
Okay.
but it is indeed a true story. But when and that's it's a very Latin American, very Mexican thing. The distinguishing between fantasy, fiction, and nonfiction is a little blurry in in Latin American fiction, but it is indeed a true story. Events, everything that's in the book really happened, but she wrote it as a novel. So.
But we kind of know at least that Jesus survived everything because she ended up meeting the author later.
Yeah, Jesusa did indeed survive. She it's so interesting. And the book's, it's not a big book. It's 300 pages, and it's not but it's so layered and so nuanced because, like I said, Jesusa was born in 1900. In 1910, the revolution broke out, and of course, her father takes up with the revolution. So and so Jesusa grows up with the revolution. Okay, she fights in the revolution, and like I said, Jesusa is a strong character, and she doesn't mind picking fights with generals, with presidents, with anyone. No one gets to put anything over on Jesusa. She is a strong woman, and she's married at a very early age to someone older, someone who's 17 years old, and Jesus is younger than that 17-year-old general, and her husband is killed, and Jesus is widowed before she's 18 years old, and she learns to fend for herself, and she takes up arms, and as you can see in this wonderful cover, there's a Mexican woman, native, fighting.
Is that Jesusa?
It is not her picture, but later in life, Elena Poniatowska edited a book of photographs of women that fought in the revolution, and Elena Poniatowska wrote the text, and it's a book of photographs, and so. But a lot of women did indeed fight in the revolution, and that is part of a big part of what this book is about. Is that the Mexican Revolution was supposed to be this great working class, or great working class revolution where everybody would have equal rights and everything would be wonderful, and everybody would be equal under the law, and of course a big part of this is that it didn't work out so well for Jesusa because the revolution kind of petered out, and she's left alone and destitute in Mexico City, where she can't read, but she is a strong woman.
Yeah, how'd she get to Paris?
Well, Elena Poniatowska was in Paris.
Oh, that's right. Then she went to Mexico City. Okay.
Yeah, and they moved back to Mexico City, but she survives, and by working a series of jobs, and but she's very anti-authoritarian. She gets in trouble with the police. She drinks. She fights, and but
I kind of hate to admit it, but I really like this woman.
Well, and she.
I'm gonna have to read it.
I do hope so. I do hope people read this because yeah, and but because as it turns out, and the reason the author and her subject become so close is because underneath it all, Jesus has got a heart of gold. She performs heroic acts, and she insists throughout just how she pretends to be just as mean as she could be. And and that's of course to protect herself because she doesn't want to be vulnerable in any way. But she performs heroic acts for people who have it even worse than she does. And isn't that always the way? It's always the people that have the least that give the most. And that's true of Jesus too.
And Mark, I'm going to interrupt you because we have a comment from Olivia Yaten, who says, good book choice, but Mark works at Rockford. Did I say you didn't? Did I misrepresent that?
Oh.
Yes, you do work at Rockford,
Mm-hmm.
also known as our Englehardt branch. And you've got another book that you want to talk about too.
Well, yeah. This is while we're on the subject of Mexican literature, I'm going to talk up my other most famous favorite book in the whole world, and that's Bless Me Ultima by.
I haven't read that either.
This is the seminal work of Chicano literature in the United States. It first was published in 1972, and Rudolfo Anaya was born and grew up in New Mexico in a family much like the characters in this book, and of course his family and the character in this book, they both belong to families that have lived in New Mexico for hundreds and hundreds of years. In other words, they're the border didn't cross. They didn't cross the border. Their border crossed.
Right.
And the main character in Bless Me Ultima, my other most favorite book in the world, his name is Antonio, or Tony. And Tony's got a lot of problems, man. He's got some serious issues because he's Chicano, living in a primarily Anglo culture, right? And this book takes place in the early mid 1940s. World War II has just ended, and so there's a lot of industrialization going on, a lot of modernization. But his family is really, really rooted in traditional agriculture, traditional ways, and so there's that conflict. There's also a lot of conflicts in his family because his mother's family, they're the Lunas. They're the farmers and quiet people, very, very Catholic and very devout and very quiet. Well, his father's family, they're the conquistadors. They're out, they're horsemen, they're out riding on the plains, and, they're the cowboys. And of course, that way of life is, both those ways of life are kind of vanishing. And so there's a lot of conflict going on in this book. And there's also a traditional healer, an older woman named Ultima, who she's really getting up there in years, and she works as a midwife and a healer, but she heals people in all sorts of ways. And see, Ultima, she's getting older, and so her parents or Tony's parents invite Ultima to come live with them at their house because she's getting too old to live on her own. And Ultima becomes Tony's spiritual guide. She guides him through this is the perfect coming of age novel because Tony's trying to figure out his life, where he belongs, what direction it's going to go in, and Ultima is like his spiritual guide. She becomes his fairy godmother, and who wouldn't want a fairy godmother, like that perfect grandmother to help you out with everything? So
I love both your books have such strong women characters.
Well, Elena Poniatowska, this was written in 1969, the most feminist book, despite the fact it's not a feminist book, but this is the most feminist book you can imagine. And Elena Poniatowska, not real well known in the United States, well, she was writing at the same time as all those guys that were active in the Latin American boom. A lot of authors that we are familiar with, that KDL owns, that like Carlos Fuentes, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Octavio Paz, they were all like writing at the same time, and they're all really well known, but not little Elena. They said, oh, they made fun of Elena. They would
really
say, oh, it's just awful. They said, oh, look at Elena. She's so sweet, writing about women and writing about the poor. Well, long after all those other authors are forgotten, we're going to remember little Elaine.
Good.
They called her the little pony. They made fun of her. And, but yeah,
Oh.
she's very well known and very in Mexico, very prolific, but she was never part of that literary elite. And, but I think Elaine is the best of them all. So
We're fighting the patriarchy tonight.
I'm going to tell everybody at Rockford that you said that. Yeah, we're fighting the patriarchy. So.
Well, sounds good, Mark. It was so wonderful having you here. You had such great book selections. I'm going to remind everybody that Mark started in KDL an anti-racist book club, that we have a Zoom book club. And I'm going to be a part of that. So I just want to tell everybody that we're reading Plague of Doves, and you can join us via Zoom for that book discussion if you'd like to be a part of that. And that's going to be on Wednesday, November 25th. So put that on your calendar, start reading Plague of Doves, and give us a call at 784-2007, and we'll give you the information about how to join that Zoom discussion. And next week, and the week after, what we're reading on Tuesday nights is going to feature librarian favorite books of 2020. So if you're looking for books to put under the Christmas tree or stuff in the stockings, next Tuesday we're talking about adult books. 3 of us librarians will get together and talk about our favorites. And the week after that, we'll have 3 of us talking about the favorite books for kids. So make sure you come back next Tuesday and the Tuesday after. See you as always at 6:30 on Tuesday. Mark, good night. Thanks for joining us. And when we're finished, Mark, we're going to write down the titles so that we get it spelled right, so people can find those in our catalog to read, because we're going to keep those female authors on top.
Smash the patriarchy.
Yeah. Thanks to everybody and good night.